And you're live.
Okay, so this is a continuation of the Committee of Conference on the FY 2022 budget. And we're down to a very small number of open areas. And the first, I just want to go back to the economic development piece. And I'm trying to get clarification about the status of 159. Apparently they're going to vote it out this afternoon. My question is, are they running out of time? And the extent to which all that has been agreed to. So that's one question. I think the money has been squared away, but the language that would go with it is in 159. So I think the big question for us is it possible for the policy to move separately from the budget, or have we sort of run out of time and we've got to put the language and the money together? And I'm trying to seek that answer. And I don't know if Representative Hooper has an answer at this point either, other than we need to find out.
Well, if I don't have answers, but I have speculation. If H-159 remains in the Senate Commerce Committee or Economic Development Committee, excuse me, it does not have time to travel to your floor and our floor and go through the process. It is my understanding that there is agreement. I honestly don't know why the language hadn't been voted out, because it is my understanding that there is agreement on the language. And I would recommend that, given that, or if in fact that is true, that we should put that bill into our budget. Otherwise it will not make it to the finish line.
Well,
and
that's
yeah. And I have no desire to wait for them to get it out and back and through and up and down.
Okay. So we have to get that resolved and get people understanding that that if we simply take what has been agreed upon, recognizing that the clock has run out, that any of the language that needs to go with the appropriations would be put into the budget. I don't know who can communicate that back to, I guess, Carolyn Wesley. I guess.
And is that true for S62 as well, or is that one okay on its time frame?
S62 is being voted on the House floor this afternoon, and I assume will be messaged to you.
So that one doesn't have the time constraint.
I believe, I am assuming that a request for waiving the rules, or whatever you call it, will happen, and it will travel to the Senate, and the Senate will have it tomorrow.
You might have to just take a break and confirm all this. I think unless we hear differently that H-159 can move within the compressed time frame, then we would simply take the policy and the parameters and definitions, or whatever the language that's in 159, and marry it with the money that is in the budget. If that, just to let the committee know that that's what would be the process. Okay, so we just need to confirm that the clock just doesn't allow it to move back and forth. Although tomorrow is what? Tomorrow is Thursday. Okay, all right.
We have to vote this budget out today. We have to reach an agreement on this budget today in order to conclude our business by Friday.
Oh, really?
I'm sorry, I'm stating the obvious.
No, you always have Saturday for the house.
No, we do not want Saturday, and we are determined to finish on Friday.
All right, all right. So 159, we've just got to figure out, do we simply take it as it's been negotiated and put it into the budget as is? We had some other language changes. I think Representative Hooper, you had several that you wanted to get off the list.
I think I did them all. We had this presentation from Secretary Young about their proposed language.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I had made a suggestion back about clarifying why that statement would be added into the budget. I beg your pardon, I don't have it in front of me.
Well, you had suggested adding some language that kind of created a context of why.
Yeah. Yes.
That it wasn't a power grab, it was a way of making sure that any expenditures were consistent with the federal requirements, and the expertise to do that was with Guidehouse and Agency of Administration. And so, but the other part about the appropriations, or if money came in, that was the other question that was raised. What would be the process if the counties reverted money back to the state?
I'm sorry, I didn't have anything on that.
Okay. You raised the question, though. Would it have to be appropriated?
Senator Kitchell, I barely know what I did 5 minutes ago.
Oh, all right.
I raised
Well,
the issue, I beg your pardon, I raised the issue of our need to appropriate.
mhm.
And I believe that we need to insist on our ability to appropriate. That is our appropriate role. I don't have language. I didn't think I was supposed to be doing that. I beg your pardon.
No, I don't know if we ever really brought it to closure, or the extent to which we would address that eventuality. Do you have any, maybe we can think about that more. If any money should be reverted to the state, how that would work, because joint fiscal can't appropriate.
Senator, if money is reverted to the state, it's probably several months out before that happens, which will.
It's probably a budget adjustment item.
Yep.
Okay.
So maybe
Well-
we need to say that explicitly.
All right. Well, I just didn't want to forget the comment or the question that you raised, and not have us revisit it and decide how we wanted to proceed.
Thank you.
So perhaps if we can get some language that, that goes with it relative to if funds are reverted to the state, then they would be subject to appropriation through the budget adjustment process.
We can add that to the provision as
All right.
Mary modified, as Representative Hooper modified it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm just watching out for your interest, Representative Hooper.
I think we have mutual, thank you. And I deeply appreciate that.
I thought so. Okay. Anything else other than we're down to the last areas, which are the 3% increases for providers, and the proposal that we have to actually start pre-funding the cost of current teachers' healthcare benefit upon retirement. And we had an appropriation, and we were that this education cost for currently employed teachers would be paid as an ed fund, as an education expenditure from the ed fund. I believe that that position is not one that you're willing to concur, and you may want to come back. I think you've had a suggestion that that it would be considered, but it would be accompanied by a revenue mechanism. And do you want to offer that out, or do you want, how do you want to proceed?
We've had a multitude of conversations with regard to this. The first thought that we had and have had conversations about was that we would agree to that if the bank franchise tax were attached to that. So that would be the House's, if we were to proceed, that was a thought that we had. We had also had a thought that we would marry it to the cloud tax. My colleagues in the House would like to see that travel separately. So as on the miscellaneous tax bill, that your proposal be married to the cloud tax, and that travel on the miscellaneous tax bill. I guess the precursor statements that I should make is that the House is not wanting to agree to any movement of additional expenses to the ed fund. Notwithstanding the arguments that you have made about the cost and the need to to manage this and to move the cost to the areas that are associated where they are being incurred or paid for where they're being incurred. There hasn't been the broader public discussion about how to be managing this. And as you know, the discussions around what is the mandates on the ed fund or obligations that are pushed into the ed fund create enormous concern in our communities who are highly sensitive to potential property tax increases. We need to have a big public conversation about how we manage pensions in general, and to this particular issue, how we manage the teachers' pension system as well as the OPEB payments. You know that the House tried to have, I think, took a very brave position at the beginning of the session in saying, we are going to address the pension issue. We have avoided this enormous obligation for too long. We are destabilizing both of those funds by not attending to the costs that are rising at an enormous rate. We know that the general fund last year paid about 10% to pensions and is now on its way to paying about 13% of the total general fund to pensions. We are dedicated to the notion that we have to do something. Our preference is to do it in a thoughtful, we have come to the conclusion that we need to do it all in a thoughtful, deliberative fashion. So that's our broad position. When we were trying to figure out how to address the Senate's concerns, we'd had discussions about, could we move it to this or that tax, couple the two together and move them together. And today's most recent thought has been that OPEB and the cloud tax could be placed into the miscellaneous tax bill.
So we had, you made reference to the bank franchise tax. That was something that we had informally mentioned as moving to the ed fund. And that was that was not viewed as acceptable. And so what you're saying is the proposal is that that this expenditure would be moved to the ed fund, but the quid pro quo is passing the cloud tax
Yeah,
that has passed the House.
that it's passed the House. And so this is an offer that is being considered in our Ways and Means Committee. They are trying to help us solve this problem. They are working to solve this problem, and this is what they are discussing in their committee this afternoon.
Well, obviously, we're the Appropriations Committee, and I'm not in any position to say that I could deliver on a tax policy that has been out under discussion for a number of years. And I think that attaching the OPEB, and I do want to distinguish, because our pension structure is one issue. The other is that we have a retired teachers' healthcare benefit that has never really been addressed. It started out, as many will remember, as being paid out of the corpus of the pension fund. And that only exacerbated the underfunding. So a couple of years ago, the treasurer came up with another construct, and we did an internal loan. And that limped us along for a little bit. But the fact is that we have this unfunded liability that is out there that has never been addressed. I know that I've heard, and I had one email, that it was a cost shift. And I have to say that our committee did not view it as a cost shift, because there's nothing to shift, because it never has actually been addressed. It's been an orphan need. And I have to say that, and I realize that some of the communications that went between the treasurer and our committees did not go to all the committees, but certainly she has been very, very clear to us in testimony that that there is an urgency to do something now, and that even though we skated by in the last bond rating review, the Fitch folks noted very clearly that our rating will be at risk of lowering if there is an inability to prudently manage the long-term liability burden. And so by not pre-funding, by default, the pay-go is falling to the general fund. And that really, I don't think is well understood in terms of what that implication is. It's understood by the appropriations folks very much, because it's a zero-sum game. And as we've seen, the demands to make up the underfunding of the teachers' retirement fund, plus the pay-go for currently retired teachers, the current budget in FY22, those costs are about $187 million.
You just got a little note from Lucy up there. We're not reading them, but you just.
So,
Sorry,
mute
sorry,
yourselves.
sorry, Stephanie. And so we have talked about this, and obviously I realize that what we're experiencing now is the fact that the retirement, the ADEC for teachers was moved in 2018 for currently employed teachers to the education fund. And the argument for that, or the rationale, is that the local schools hire the teachers, determine the salary, they determine the number, they determine that obligation. And it's a part of our K through 12 system. So you know that we feel very strongly that there is a need to act now. and that this is in fact an education expenditure. It is something that has not been, it's not moving it from the general fund because the general fund is still under the burden of all the underfunding. And this year, I know the ADAC went up considerably, and that was a source of concern. And but on the other hand, the underfunding gap that was created because the ADAC wasn't high enough was like $370 million of underfunding fell to the general fund side. And the Appropriations Committee has felt very, very strongly and feeling a great deal of concern over what this means in this environment. And for anyone who thinks that this is just an education fund issue, that is not true. This is by putting so much pressure onto the general fund, which is growing at an anemic rate relative to the revenue sources that are flowing into the ed fund. The price that is being paid is very clear. We've had to underfund. If we had 187 million, it would make a big difference what we could do for our higher ed, what we could do for scholarships in VSAC, what we could do for our mental health system that is absolutely riddled with vacancies, and people are unhappy with that. We haven't really done much for Reach Up. We make pitiful little changes, and we feel good when we do it. But the fact is that there is a cost shift, in my view, and it isn't to the ed fund. The cost shift has really been to the lower income, most vulnerable Vermonters who depend on the services and the benefits that come from the general fund. So this is a topic that we have spent a lot of time on the Senate side. It's not a new issue. It's been out there. I know that there's been concern because of the increase in the ADAC to the 38 million. And so what I would propose doing as a way of addressing this concern would be to put in language that would have some upside protection so that if there is the growth in the OPEB in the education fund, that above the CPI or whatever would be accommodated by the general fund. It's a way of addressing the concerns that I think the ADAC for teachers going from 7 million to the 38 million has created. But it would also mean that we are putting in place at long last a predictable, ongoing, identifiable source of pre-funding, an obligation that we have that is going to, if we do it dollar for dollar, we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars that we wouldn't have to if that money was in a fund to be invested and compounded the same as for pensions. So I would like to propose that I cannot agree to a cloud tax as the other part of the compromise. It's a tax policy that it's not even in my jurisdiction. And we're only a couple of days away from adjournment, so I don't see that's happening. And frankly, we all know that probably the governor would not support it. So what I would ask is for you to consider having some language that would provide for protection to the education fund if in fact we had very large increases on the OPEB prepay from this year on. And other committee members, I don't want to speak for everyone on the committee of conference, but it's something that we've really struggled with. And we see the impact in terms of not only the long-term getting our fiscal house in order, but we also see the insidious and difficult decisions or the impact that the demands on our general fund programs and services are having for particularly Vermont seniors, people with mental illness, our lower income kids that are struggling to go to college. This is not coming without a price being paid. It's just where it is. And I understand the property tax. And the irony is 70% of 70% of households are income sensitized and are paying based on income. So there is that circuit breaker already in place. And we just think that now is the time to start making a tangible step toward addressing a financial liability and obligation that we have to our teachers, and that it will be the fiscally prudent thing. And it gives a message to the rating agencies that the state of Vermont is moving beyond studying it or postponing it or talking about it to actually doing something discrete. And so that's what I would like you to consider. And I will let my other conferees, if I have not adequately represented our position, allow them an opportunity why we feel so strongly that this is the right thing to do at this time. Senator Westman or Senator Sears, I don't know if you have anything more you want to add.
Senator, I think you've expressed our position extremely well. Anything I could add would be palaver, really, because I think you covered everything. And I do think that this is a real issue. I've given in this budget on the issue of the high school of Vermont, which I think clearly, if under corrections, if you're under 21, you'd be educated in your hometown. It's an education expense. I think we get into these arguments, but it's clear to me anyway that, there's a lot of talk about the property tax, but people forget about the income tax. And the income tax is what, the income sensitivity is what keeps most Vermonters' property taxes based upon their income. But with a growth of 3% in the general fund taxes, and these are in good times, what's going to happen when the bad times hit and we have to make cuts again and again and again? And we all decry the sad state of affairs with our child care agencies and et cetera. And that's a direct reflection. So I just think this is one place where we need to recognize this is an education expense. It's not a general fund expense. And I'm hopeful that the House will look to this and join with us in this policy.
So, okay. Sorry, Senator Westman.
Well, the first thing I would say is, for me, this is an alignment of expenditures. And I think for long-term or the cost of healthcare for educators, it is a cost of education. It is a package. What we offer our educators, both salary and benefits, is a package. And the alignment of expenditures should recognize that. Second, for me, the way we have structured our taxes by giving, not only do the property taxes go into the ed fund, but all of the sales taxes, 25% of the rooms and meals tax, a third of the purchase and use tax, all of the lottery. The way we have structured our taxes since we did that, revenues to the ed fund have grown 20%. To the general fund, they've grown 3%. It's crippling our ability to be able to maintain programs for our most vulnerable. So this is really a problem for the most vulnerable in our society. And we have a responsibility to take care of them as well. And we haven't done a very good job. When I'm glad we did something to recognize this in this budget, but the reach up population, when you take a family of two, if you're outside of Chittenden County, the monthly check is $581 a month. That's disgraceful, but that's partly because of the history that the revenues to the general fund are not growing, and we need to recognize that. It's not surprising to me that the last two issues of major importance in this are whether or not our designated agencies that are the services for long-term care, for developmental services, and for mental health, and a number of other areas, that increase of whether it's 2 or 3% versus this is the last thing on the table. And we are not going to be able to do anything for childcare, and we're going to have trouble maintaining in the future our higher ed system if we can't realign and make sure that expenditures are fair on each side. And I would just say all of that. It will be very difficult for me to vote for or sign on to a budget without some movement in this area.
So I know you can't obviously give us an answer in terms of our counter proposal on that would say that this education expenditure should be funded out of the education fund, and which is it's pre-funding. It's not something that's happening now. The default of not doing it is all being absorbed by the general fund with obvious collateral impact. And that's why we were hoping that if you would consider the protection for that upward growth, which I know has been generated because of what happened with the teachers' ADEC, may have, obviously it's influencing this, and that that if the amount exceeds the CPI growth, then that the balance would be picked up with the general fund. So it's a different approach, not a different approach. It's a way of putting in kind of a circuit breaker in terms of what that upward demand might be on the education fund. And we know that when we change the revenue streams, we were concerned about it. Appropriations on both sides was concerned about this restructuring and how this revenue, how this configuration was going to pan out. And there was concern at that point about impact on general fund revenues. And so there is built into that change is to look back, and I think it's in 2024, to really see how this allocation of resources to the state, because we are talking about either way, these are resources, these are revenues to the state under either the statewide property tax or all the other tax and fee revenues that come in. And so we can look at that recalibration at that point. But in terms of your request that we do this as a package, and that the cloud tax would move forward, and this would move forward as a package, is something that I simply cannot. I'm not able to agree to, and it's something. It's a condition that it's impossible for the conferees here to meet. So I thank you. I realize that we have probably taken longer, but this has not been an area that we don't have a great deal of. We would not have done this, and we did not do it lightly. And it's because anyone on appropriation sees how it all comes together, and where the impact and the collateral damage occurs. And we we also are very concerned about what our treasurer is telling us about what we need to do to get our fiscal house in order. And so all of that converged to move this request forward and to put in place a pre-funding structure that has been deferred way too long. So thank you.
So, thank you, senators. In a second, I'll make sure that we understand your proposal, but let me just acknowledge and note that we too share your passion for the needs that we all see. One of the great privileges of sitting on the Appropriations Committee is you get an insight into all of state government, as well as the lives of Vermonters and how they are being served or not served by our actions. So we share the passion that you have for this, for serving the people that we are trying to serve. You know that we can't answer your proposal here. So let us take it away and ponder it. But just to be clear, one, I'm assuming you don't have anything in writing. But what you are continuing in your proposal that the cost shift, the costs of pre-funding, that we create a pre-funding program in the education fund to the order is 13.8, I think, million, something on that
Yes.
order as you proposed in the budget. And you have suggested that there be some sort of circuit breaker or something in place so that if those costs rise at a rate greater than the CPI, one of the CPIs, that the general fund would pick up the difference of that circuit breaker or that cost.
Mhm.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I realize we're in a very difficult environment, and I don't know how many people are listening to this discussion, but I think in many ways it epitomizes the work of what the Appropriations Committee is charged to do. And that is where everything comes together. And so much of what we do is broken up by particular area or policy area or whatever. And we get to see the interrelationship and the impacts in ways that that cannot happen necessarily when you're looking at a discrete policy area. And so when people, as I said before, people would say, well, what's that got to do, or why would I care about this? Anyone who is listening to this debate, if you're listening because you want to increase, I don't know, a reimbursement to our dentists so we can get better access for our Medicaid beneficiaries, or we could increase the primary care reimbursement, which was requested, or we could do a variety of things that we know and would like to do, but we just are so constrained that all of those areas where people are making requests of us and we turn them down, then they have to understand that it's not because we don't care and it doesn't trouble us and it doesn't pain us. It's just we are having these costs just cannibalize so many areas of state government. And that's and that's what is the driving force behind why we felt that this was the right thing to do. And this is classic in state government or any other government. I'll solve my problem by trying to put the cost or pick somebody else's pocket. And so I understand why there's a desire not to have an expenditure picked up or to have it picked up some other place. But what might solve a problem one place only exacerbates or creates a problem somewhere else. And That's really the heart of this. And so our proposal, you've cited it absolutely correctly, Representative Hooper. And I appreciate that. Obviously, you are listening very carefully, and so we will obviously not expect an immediate response, but wanted to take this opportunity to make it clear, because we don't have the same opportunities maybe as we would if we were in the building, or actually maybe this is better because I bet there are at least 200 people listening. And we certainly would never have that many at the State House. But this is maybe a lesson in budgeting and finance and fiscal policy and bonding, which actually impacts towns. As we know, it's not just state government, it's municipalities. So it has collateral impacts all over the place.
So Senator, will certainly take your proposal and consider it deeply. I again would note that the House absolutely understands the effect of the entire pension system and its burden on our state budget. And I would just note again that we began what I call a very brave and courageous effort to reform the system in an effort to control these costs so that no one would have to be seeing the rapid rates of increase and the deep stabilization of the system that we're faced with. So we all see the problem. The challenge is not only seeing the problem, but finding a way that not just makes the numbers add up on a spreadsheet, but it brings our colleagues along and understanding what the issues are and being able to communicate why this is the best policy going forward. And until we have that sort of agreement, I think any sort of policy proposals that get ahead of broad understanding of the public and general support are doomed they are in trouble. Maybe they're not doomed. And so it is not just a matter of making the budget work, but also of assuring that the folks that we represent understand why we're taking these positions and the value of these positions to our communities. And we just can't get ahead of them on that. And so these are the pieces that we are drawing together. We see clearly in our committees what the problems are. We need to educate our colleagues and our communities on what the problems are so that they don't think that this is just a casual, oh, let the property taxpayer pay for it. So let us take your proposal.
Well, I would like to say one other thing, and that is within state government, if it all fell to the general fund, we would have to figure out how to accommodate it. And how do we do it? We take it by holding vacancies. We find savings. We do a whole host of things to wrench it out.
Mhm.
And so, but I understand we need to deal with pensions, and then we need to make structural changes probably because we've got more people retired than we've got people paying in. So that gets into a design issue and different changes. The OPEB is really, I realize it's a retirement issue, but it's one that is not structurally the same. Actually, one might think if we've got fewer teachers working today, then collecting the burden of pay as you go for their healthcare on general fund is going to grow. And as the fewer teachers are, the actual prepay it's great. So it's we were seeing the need to do something on the pre-funding as a separate need. It does tie back into people who are currently working, but that's why we felt we needed to act on it, and it was discreetly different than the larger pension issue that gets into the parameters under which benefits are calculated and years of service and so forth. So I know that they're interconnected, but we saw them as requiring two different discrete responses. So thank you for taking this back and talking with your colleagues, and we will await your response.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, by the way, I just had one question. I don't know. We obviously took a testimony from the treasurer. Commissioner Gresham, does the administration, obviously, you had some money in for on the retirement side, nothing pay-go for healthcare. Do you have anything you want to add on this, or before we let our House conferees go back and confer?
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually received a couple of questions this morning from people asking, where the governor was on this. And, I think it's appropriate to state unequivocally, I think the governor supports the pre-funding of teachers' OPEB and supports the allocation to the education fund for that. The reasons I think have already been stated. It is a part of everyday educational expenses, and it should reside in the education fund. And in addition, it follows the same pattern as we do for the teacher's pension, whereby normal costs in the pension are paid in the ed fund, and the ADEC is paid in the general fund. But I would add one final thing, and that is that with this move, our unfunded liabilities will decline by approximately $800 million, which is not small change, considering that we have a $5.7 billion unfunded liability facing us. As one of the people in the state who was part of the credit agency review, I can assure you they are watching carefully. And so,
to be clear, I beg your pardon for interrupting, Commissioner.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Representative Hooper, go ahead.
To be clear, you are not suggesting an ongoing revenue stream to support the pre-funding. And so I do not believe that this meets the criteria of a pre-funded program. Well, I guess, okay, so you're saying the ed fund should pay for it, but you are not putting in place the other element, which is the annual increase necessary to accomplish a true pre-funded system. So while if we in fact were doing a true pre-funded system, yes, we would see those sorts of savings, but without that sort of mechanism to see an annual rate increase to on the pension, on the state employees side, we were looking at having to increase the pre-funding by 10% annually for 3 years and then 3% for the remaining of time. And you are not proposing that, are you?
No, unlike the general fund where appropriations need to be made, as I've often commented, the education fund is a self-managed fund, a self-balancing fund. So as an obligation of the education fund, the teacher's OPEB normal cost would be considered part of the education fund, and it would be balanced by the revenues that are coming into it, which include, a half a dozen different revenue sources. But it would be paid for in that way. So it would not require an annual appropriation any different than any other education fund obligation would.
So Senator Kitchell,
yes.
For a pre-funding mechanism to work, it's not just this 13.8 million. It is an ever increasing amount, as I said, and I don't know that the formula has been worked out on the ed fund side or on the teachers' pension side, but on state employees, it was a 10% increase annually. So yes, I understand the notion that the ed fund would just cover those costs, but you're suggesting a circuit breaker that would say the GF would pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
So
I am.
Sure. Okay, but so clearly some dollars are going to come back into the GF. It has to.
But it's not clear to me that that ever increasing amount would touch the normal cost. There's a difference between the normal cost and the ADEC. And I think, and the treasurer would be the better person to answer this, but I think the proposal was for the ADEC as opposed to the normal cost, which will rise and fall with the cost of healthcare, with the number of retirees, and all the other things that pay into it.
It's just my understanding that this proposal is not in its truest sense a real pre-funding. Now, maybe we're just arguing over that. Well, that is what I have been told about this. At the end of the day, we need to take your proposal and consider it. I just wanted to be cautious with what seemed to be a promise of that we would be reducing the unfunded liability by $800,000, and I am not convinced that that would be the case. I think we need to see the math on that.
I think that and maybe we can get that from the treasurer, because I believe that it by getting pre-funding and getting the benefit of investments in the compounding, it dramatically reconfigures that out year liability that is dragging us down. But we can. I don't have that document right here, Representative Hooper, but it's not insignificant. But we could get it from the treasurer.
Thank you. And I am fascinated by Commissioner Gresham's statement that the governor supports moving this expenditure to the Ed Fund. So thank you for that information.
Okay.
Let us take this proposal and we will.
Are there any other any items that we need to follow up on while we're having a break?
I'm not going to have a break. I'm going to
Well,
go
no, I mean,
I'm-
no, I realize that. Euphemistically, we're supposed to just make sure what happens on 159 and whether that time frame really does work. And I just want to make sure I haven't forgotten anything. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So we go
Want to
on.
go off live?
Yes, we should go off live. We're adjourning. And we'll have to set another time to come back.
Okay.
I don't know what your schedule looks like. It's 4:15 already on a Wednesday.
Well,
It probably
We're
won't take
here.
you too long to say no.
we are here until we are done.
Mhm.
And, but let us just agree that we're getting done today.
All right.
That's the bottom line.
right.
Yeah. So
All
let
right.
us go and we will